Unbelievable. Khamzat Chimaev just absolutely ragdolled Dricus Du Plessis, not just for 2 rounds like most people said he would do, but for 25 minutes straight, in probably the most dominating title performance we're going to see for the next couple of years. Dominated Dricus Du Plessis, who was on road to becoming one of the greatest middleweights of all time, and he's the new middleweight champion of the world. UFC 319, the main card, especially with those KOs, were crazy, but Khamzat Chimaev is the real deal at middleweight. No one's beating this dude. We're going to break down the card coming from every fight, from the prelims to the main card at main event, and we'll go in there with the first fight in. Alibi Idiris versus Joseph Morales. This was the Ultimate Fighter finale, I believe. Morales gets a submission in the second round. Yeah, this was a fight where I think Idiris was one of the biggest favourites on the card, and Morales dominated him. He dominated on the feet, dominated him in the grappling exchange, and eventually got the submission over Idiris. Yeah, Morales just completely dominated in the entire fight. I don't know what people had seen. I'm going to be honest, I haven't seen The Ultimate Fighter. I don't know what people had seen to make Idiris, I think it was a minus 500 favourite in this fight, but it was a huge favourite, and he looked awful in the fight. He just kept spamming like weird spinning shit all the time, like spinning elbows. He wasn't really doing anything significant on the feet. It looked good visually because he was just spamming spinning shit. Landed nothing. Morales was kind of picking him apart with the boxing, and then every grappling exchange, Morales would just dominate. He'd take him down, dominate him, and eventually obviously found the triangle choke. And The Ultimate Fighter, I'm just going to rant on because this is an Ultimate Fighter finale. It's a weird concept. Like, you've got 2 low-level fighters, let's be honest, 2 guys who are likely never even going to sniff the top 15, with like a full-on promo before the fight. They've got this big event. It's like a tournament finale. You've got Dana White and what's going afterwards. I just find it a weird concept that just because of The Ultimate Fighter, you get 2 very low-level fighters where the winner gets like a whole ceremony made about them around a pay-per-view, which I've never understood. But Morales gets the job done. Do I think he's going to go too far at 125? No, he's never going to break the top 15, but I think he'll be able to shake up, I guess, unranked in that division. You know, he's a good grappler. And for Idiris, I mean, again, he looks pretty hopeless. Looked pretty bad with the striking and got dominated in the grappling. So good win for Morales, dominated Idiris, and there's not much to say about in that matchup. Then we had Karine Silva versus Dione Barboza, a rematch, and quite a controversial one too, where Karine Silva wins the decision, but again, it was quite a controversial one. I'm kind of confused how Karine Silva won that fight. I thought it was a robbery. I thought Barboza should have won the fight. Listen, it wasn't like domination from either part, but I just feel like Karine Silva, she struggled to look good at the highest level. Like in her past 2 fights, she's looked shit. She looked good against Arujo in the first round, then completely gassed out and was just butt scooting for the rest of the fight. In this fight with Dione Barboza, somebody who she's beaten before, apart from that one Dorse choke arm, yeah, it might have been a guillotine she had locked up, she hasn't really had any significant moments in this fight. I thought Dione Barboza was winning the fight entirely. I thought she was winning the fight in the striking exchanges for the most part, and in the wrestling exchanges, like a couple of times where she tripped Karine Silva and put her in get her in dominant position. So I just feel like I don't understand where it is for Karine Silva. Like, her submission game is still strong, but she was getting outworked pretty much everywhere the fight would go, and that's why I'm kind of confused how Barboza lost the fight. I thought she won 2 rounds to 1. I thought the first round could have gone to Karine Silva, the last 2 could have gone to Barboza, so I'm confused how Barboza didn't win this fight, especially on short notice as well. That even makes it worse for Karine Silva, the fact that this was on short notice. But I guess good win for Karine Silva, gets the job done, back in the winning column. But again, she was one of the biggest prospects in women MMA coming into that UFC 309 fight with Arujo. You know, she was on this massive winning streak, a bunch of finishes on there, great submission artist, and in the last 2 fights, she's kind of been exposed. She doesn't look good at the highest level. Her stand-up and her durability is pretty weak. She can't really do well against other heavy grapplers, so I guess good win for Karine Silva, but I thought Dione Barboza should have got the job done. But again, it's women MMA. Who really gives a shit about this? Then we had Edson Barboza versus Drakkar. Seeing Edson Barboza on the early prelims kind of just tells you everything you need to know about the stage of Edson Barboza's career. But yeah, Drakkar gets the decision win. Again, quite a close fight. You know, they both had their moments. Edson Barboza with the kicks, Drakkar with the boxing, a bit of grappling there as well. Drakkar gets the job done. Was a close fight. I think Edson Barboza needs to hang the gloves up, man. I don't know what age he is, but I think he's nearing 40 years old, and he's been around the sport for so long. Like, he's a veteran of the game. He's been around 155 and 145 for a long time. He's had longevity. He's had 2 years out as well since that fight with Lerone Murphy. The guy needs to hang the gloves up at this point. He's taken another loss in a row. And don't get me wrong, he still has great kicks. You know, in that first round, he was completely tuning up the leg of Drakkar Klose. He was landing a couple of body kicks as well. But he's visibly getting worse. You know, his boxing isn't really getting going. There was times when Drakkar Klose would throw like a super telegraphed punch, and Edson Barboza would have 0 defense for it. And he is visibly getting slower, visibly getting worse. And at this stage in his career, he's just taking unnecessary damage. You know, he's never going to break the top 15 again. He's losing in multiple weight classes. I think now would have been a good time for Edson Barboza to retire. I thought this was a winnable fight for Barboza as well. Like I said, he made it close, but this was like a more winnable fight where I thought he could have potentially got a finish over Drakkar Klose if he'd, if he got going with the boxing, but he's getting worse. He's taking damage. I think this should probably be it for Edson Barboza. But yeah, Drakkar Klose, he beat Edson Barboza mainly with a boxing, roughed him up with the hands, nearly finished him as well. I think he was in the first or the second round, right at the end of the round, and just controlled him in the clinch. A bunch of foot stomps, held him up against the cage. Kind of a bit of a dirty approach, not dirty in the sense that he's cheating, but, like a rough approach from Drakkar Klose. Gets the job done. Edson Barboza made it competitive, but I thought Drakkar Klose won pretty comfortably, so good win for Drakkar Klose. Didn't really get any hype from that matchup because you're facing a 40-year-old Edson Barboza and you barely got through him, but good job. But I think the main takeaway from this fight is that Edson Barboza should retire. You're nearly 40 years old. You've taken a shit ton of damage. You're slowing down. At this point, just hang the gloves up. Unless he's trying to get on like the next Brazil card. I think the next one's in like October, so that's going to be too quick of a turnaround. But yeah, I think for Barboza, either get him on like a Brazilian pay-per-view for retirement or just let him go now. He should be leaving the spot sometime soon. Alexander Hernandez versus Chase Hooper, where Alexander Hernandez finishes Chase Hooper. It's quite a big underdog. I came into this fight thinking that Hooper, it was going to be a visible step up in competition, but I thought he was still going to get the job done. But no, Hernandez, right at the end of the first round, in a little buzzer beater, knocks out Chase Hooper, clocks him with a massive right hand, drops him, goes for a ground and pound finish, and at like 2 seconds left, gets to finish over Chase Hooper. Yeah, Hooper, he's hard, man. This guy was a bit of a good prospect at 155 because he's a monster grappler. He is. He's dominated some good names in the grappling, that fight with Jordan Levitt, even his most recent one with Jim Miller. He is a really good grappler, but he never had a chance to engage in this fight. Alexander Hernandez was constantly switching stances, constantly moving on the back foot. Hooper couldn't really get going with the grappling, and his striking sucks. Chase Hooper's striking, he's kind of like this Ben Askren. I know he kind of gets compared to Ben Askren because of his looks, but it is true. He's this heavy grappler who has awful striking, leaves himself open to get caught a lot, and at the end of the first round, he got too comfortable. There was 5 seconds left. He decided to put in a bit of a pressure on Alexander Hernandez, got caught, and gets knocked the fuck out. And that's kind of the hype gone for Chase Hooper. Like I said, don't get me wrong, he's a great grappler, one of the best unranked grapplers at 155, but you've got to work on your striking. I feel like the frame as well is tough. He looks he's tall for the division, but he's quite skinny and looks a bit frail for the division, and obviously his striking's awful, so I do think there's work for Chase Hooper at 155, but it is mainly the striking. He got knocked out by Hernandez, and this is a great win for Hernandez as well. I think he's on like a 3-fight winning streak now, and he's looked pretty well rounded recently. Dominated Kurt Holloway with the wrestling and the striking, beat Figlak, I think it was, as well, with the wrestling in his last fight, and now he's just gone out there and slept Chase Hooper. In all seriousness, it's only like 1 or 2 more wins until Alexander Hernandez gets another shot at the top 15, so good win for Hernandez, capitalized on Chase Hooper, and it wasn't just the knockout shot as well, it was him being able to maneuver him, avoid the takedowns, because that was what surprised me. I thought we'd see a lot more kind of takedowns from Chase Hooper in this fight. That's his bread and butter, doesn't shoot any takedowns, but ultimately, Hernandez knocks the fuck out of Chase Hooper, and that's another prospect gone at 155. We then had Jessica Andrade versus Lupita Godinez. Godinez gets the decision win. Another kind of close fight. Some people thought Andrade won this. I thought the decision went to the right one with Lupita Godinez getting the job done. Yeah, this was a fun scrap for women MMA standards, and kind of expected it to be that as well. Lupita Godinez, she's like a wrestler-heavy approach, but as the fight goes on, she kind of engaged in a scrap. Later on in the fight, she's usually swinging, and she's quite a fun wrestler. And Andrade, I've always said this, she might not be the most consistent fighter, but she has to be one of your favourite women MMA fighters, just because she always brawls, and it ended up being a bit of a fun scrap. And Lupita Godinez is definitely improving as a fighter. You compare it to earlier days, she had pretty bad striking, hesitant wrestling. Now she's kind of mixing things up well, but her stand-up is kind of obviously the biggest flaw. And I'd say her durability as well. Lupita Godinez is one of the best first-round women MMA fighters there is, but when it gets into like the second and the third round, that's where she struggles. Her last fight, she ended up struggling in the third round, and then in this fight with Andrade, she was getting wobbled a couple of times, and I thought Andrade did enough. I thought Andrade got the job done. I don't think it was a robbery where it was disgraceful how she didn't get her hands raised, but I thought Andrade did enough with the damage because she was lighting up Lupita Godinez in those later rounds, and she was able to kind of avoid most takedowns, but I don't think it was a robbery. Good win for Lupita Godinez. I say we give her like a title eliminator next. I'm not sure who's at the top of that division next, but maybe you give her like a Tatiana Suarez or something next, like a top contender for Lupita Godinez, maybe even like a Yang Xiaonan, and then if she can get through one of them, give her a title shot. And for Andrade, it's a bit of a tough position for Andrade now. 3-fight losing streak in her career. a couple more and she's probably going to get cut. And she's only 32, but she's been around the spot for a long time. And like I said, made it competitive, but Godinez gets the job done. Is what it is. Good win for Lupita Godinez. Then we had GM3 versus Michal. This fight was going to go one of two ways. GM3 by some sort of submission, or Michal by an easy KO in the first round. I picked Michal to get the KO, and he did. Yeah, it was easy for Michal. He was able to find the chin of Gerald Meerschaert pretty comfortably, and eventually got the wobbling done. The wobble GM3, dropped him, got him back up to the feet after he pulled guard, dropped him again, went for the ground and pound finish. Herb Badine kind of left that going for a bit long, but he gets the finish, and it's a new mythical fighter, Fighting Nerds Michal. It was a good night for the Fighting Nerds tonight, and yeah, since Michal's joined the Fighting Nerds, he has looked obviously significantly better. 2 first-round KOs in a row, knocks out Dricus Du Plessis, knocked out GM3, and Michal's always had dangerous stand-up. You look at his record in the UFC, you might disagree, but he's always had pretty heavy hands. It's just he's had a murderer's raw in the middleweight division. You know, he's had to face the likes of Shara Magomedov, Michel Pereira, Kevin Holland, all in a row. And even in that fight with Shara Magomedov, he kind of made it competitive. So I feel like I felt bad for Michal because he is dangerous, but he's always had these tough tests. And now that he's fighting someone similar at his level, he's performing. Called for Marvin Vettori, and I think Marvin Vettori is a fair call-out. But Vettori's in a bit of a bad career spot, still in the top 15. I don't mind Michal versus Vettori. And yeah, GM3, I mean, he's got a very basic style. He's got really good submission ability. When he gets you to the ground, he's got a very high chance of pulling off a submission, but actually getting the fight to the ground, and even his striking is very weak. And he has no head movement whatsoever. You know, Michal would start lighting him up on the feet, wouldn't move his head, and eventually he paid the price of, once again, getting knocked the fuck out. So good win for Michal. Knocks out GM3. Looks to be a lot better from the Fighting Nerds. You can kind of tell that the Fighting Nerds have had an effect on him because he's finally, like, you can tell he's worked on the range a lot. He's mastering the range. He's mastering the distance. He's always in the right place at the right time. I do think I would like to see a little bit more kind of urgency on the feet when he did wobble GM3, but good win for Michal. Gets the job done. 2-fight winning streak. And it's only a matter of time before GM3 gets cut from the UFC, let's be honest. Maybe you do him versus, like, I don't know, Trezzy and Gore next to see who gets cut, but good one for Michal. Anyway, Sursukayev versus Eric Nolan. Obviously, Sursukayev coming in on 5 days' notice from the Contender Series, and he gets the submission in the second round against Eric Nolan. Yeah, gets the submission in the second round, takes the back, dominates him in every grappling exchange, pulls off the submission over Eric Nolan. Yeah, this is just another glorified Contender Series fight. It was on the featured prelim. I think they both had a slot at the press conference as well, which is crazy. How Sursukayev and Eric Nolan have a spot at the fucking press conference at UFC 317. 319, but they did. But yeah, it's impressive for Sursukayev. You know, 2 wins in 5 days. I think that's the quickest turnaround, or one of the quickest turnarounds in modern UFC history. Obviously, Chimaev fought twice in a week, but to fight twice in 5 days is impressive. And for both of them to be finishers too, I guess he's a bit of a prospect in this division. But with that being said, Nolan did nearly finish him as well in that first round. He got saved by the bell. Did Sursukayev. You know, he got wobbled against the cage. I think if Eric Nolan would have been able to put again another combination together, there would have been 10 more seconds on that clock. He would have probably got Sursukayev out of there, but he nearly finished him. But I don't see him going too far. I guess he's got hype. He's a teammate of Chimaev. He fought on 5 days' notice. I don't see him going too far in this weight class, but I will say he does have dominant ground game. You know, he was trying to stand with Eric Nolan, which wasn't going too well with him, but every time he'd kind of shoot a takedown, that's where he'd have success. You know, he slammed him in the first round, dominated him in every grappling exchange, obviously got the submission as well, so I guess this was a little treat. We lost Ruzy Boy and Brian Battle. 5 days' notice comes on Sursukayev, and he dominates Eric Nolan in the grappling exchanges, gets the job done. Can't see him going too far, but he wins the fight, and I guess that's a good win for Sursukayev. Then we had Tim Elliott versus Kai Asakura. I don't think we should ever, I've said this for so long, and it just keeps getting worse. We should never bet on fighters coming over from different big organizations to the UFC, especially with the co-main event of this card. Tim Elliott gets the submission in the second round, and Tim Elliott is the most crafty veteran in the UFC right now. Gets the submission over Kai Asakura, gets him in his signature guillotine, gets the neck, and submits Kai Asakura, and Kai Asakura is now 0-2 in the UFC with 2 submission losses. How can so many fighters come over to the UFC and fail? I'll talk about this a bit more in the Aaron Pico situation in the comment event, but I don't understand how this year there's got to be some sort of record of like 1-27 or some shit from fighters coming over to the UFC from different organizations, because they're genuinely doing awful. And Kai, he got throat checked. You know, he loses to Pantoja. No shame. You've literally lost to the best flyweight in the world right now. You lose to Tim Elliott, who's 40 years old, who's a win-loss fighter, who's barely breaking the top 15 after a 2-year layoff. You get finished by that guy. That's where you're starting to look difficult. Yeah, he just pulls off a crafty submission win, gets the submission with his guillotine, and a great win for 30-year-old Team Elliott. You know, to come back from a layoff and to get a submission of a guy like Kai Asakura, who, while a lot of hype and was a massive favourite, you've got to give it to him. And for Kai Asakura, I mean, where do you even go from then? I'm sure he was getting a lot more money and a lot more hype in Rising than he is now, because who do you actually give him next? It's going to be some sort of guy like unranked at 125, and to go from being like this superstar, this massive star in Japan in Rising, to potentially fighting in the Apex against an unranked lightweight, unranked flyweight, has to be a massive fall off for Kai Asakura. But again, the UFC is just different. The best flyweight outside of the UFC loses to Tim fucking Elliott. You can't make this shit up. Ruined everybody's parlays, but no. Tim Elliott's a weird fighter as well. He looks really jiggy on the feet. Like, he does have like a weird fighting style on the feet where he just looks bad. Like, he looks like one of these guys, like an amateur who's trying to look good. But then I guess he made it work. Got the fight to the ground, shot a perfect takedown, and got the submission of a Kai Asakura. And Asakura did look good on the feet. He was tagging Tim Elliott. He was a bit patient, but it's the grappling of Asakura that's the massive flaw. So I assume the UFC, if they are going to keep him around, probably going to give him a striker next. But I guess good win for Tim Elliott. Gets the submission win. And you've got to respect him for it. Gerald Cannonier versus MVP. This kind of went how I expected it to be, an odd fight, and it was a bit of an odd fight where MVP gets a pretty, not low level, but a bit of a lackluster decision win. He pulls off the decision win over Gerald Cannonier. Fair play to MVP, 3-1 in the UFC, going to be top 8 in the middleweight division now, ranked in 2 weight classes, and he got the job done pretty comfortably against Cannonier, to be fair. But I feel like MVP's a really boring fighter that never want to entertain. People never really want to entertain that talk. I feel like when you think of MVP, you think of this fun fighter, when in reality, the dude's a clip farmer. You know, if you actually watch an MVP fight, like if it's a 15-minute fight, like 13 minutes of that fight is nothing going on. It's just a lot of showboating. He'll showboat all the time, and then again, he'll land the occasional land, which is where he gets his clips from. But a lot of the time, it is nothing. You know, he dropped Cannonier in that first round with a nice 1-2, I think he was, and I think he pushed him over as well in the second round. So he does have moments as MVP, and he's a unique fighter. But in terms of entertainment, I don't know, I'm just not buying it. I don't find MVP that fun of a fighter. In that 15-minute fight that they just had, I know it was a lot of Cannonier hold him against the cage and hold him down and everything, but even on the feet, MVP, there's like a period of 10 seconds that goes by, he doesn't throw anything, and then he'll throw like a nice 1-2 down the pipe. It might miss, it might land. He'll defend a couple more shots, do a bit more showboating, and it's kind of just repeat from there. And for me, at least, it's just not that much of an entertaining style. But with that being said, MVP must be super fucking tricky to fight. You know, to do that to Cannonier as well, who went 25 minutes and kind of looked, I don't want to say looked good because he got dominated, I guess, but, you know, it went 25 minutes without Adesanya in his prime, and he's, you know, one of the more better middleweight strikers out there as well. So for MVP to do that to Cannonier is impressive, and, you know, to do it to the likes of Shah Magomedov and Kevin Holland, he's a tricky striker as MVP, must be one of the most difficult fighters to figure out, but he's always in the right place. Obviously, the grappling is the biggest flaw of MVP. Getting taken down and held by Cannonier is crazy work, but it is what it is. MVP's in the top 8. I think a fight with Adesanya next. You know what? Even that fight with Adesanya, I've been saying for a long time, him and Adesanya is like a, you know, like a super fight, like a fantasy fight. But after watching this, and after watching Adesanya's title fights in the UFC as well, I don't even know if that'd be a good fight. That would potentially be like a stinky fight, but I'd assume that MVP and Adesanya would be next. And for Cannonier, it's again similar to Edson Barboza, like hang up the gloves. You're 40 years old. You're barely winning fights. You're a bit of a win-loss fight. You've lost 3 of your last 4, I think. You're at that stage in your career where it's like, what are you doing it for? You can still make it competitive, you know. I don't think it would have been a robbery if Cannonier would have beaten MVP, but it is what it is. MVP gets the job done. Another pretty lackluster performance, but he's going to get glazed because of the highlight reels and the clip farming that he does. It is what it is. Good win for MVP. And then the card started to turn up with Carlos Prates and Geoff Neal. Prates had no fucking time to waste as he knocks out Geoff Neal with the first of 2 in a row spinning back elbows, and he gets a good spinning back elbow at the end of the first round against Geoff Neal, and he's the first man to knock out Geoff Neal. Yeah, Prates is legit, man. This guy kind of reminds me of Alex Pereira in the welterweight division. This tall, lanky striker, utilizes low kicks, utilizes range, and then eventually always has that touch of death. It reminds me of Porton a bit, but yeah, he just beats the fuck out of Geoff Neal the entire fight, and that's impressive, man. Geoff Neal ain't an easy guy to beat. You know, I've always said he's one of the best boxers in the welterweight division. He's one of the most slick strikers. He always makes it competitive. So for Carlos Prates to be picking him apart the entire fight, it is impressive. You know, he's landing the low kicks, those knees down the middle, landing those elbows, picking up apart with the boxing. And Carlos Prates looked pretty good in this fight. He had high output as well. Defensively looked slick. He was like in the Matrix in this fight, picking him apart, and then to slump him out cold like that as well. Just casually land like a spinning back elbow and knock out Geoff Neal in that fashion. Prates, I think, is the scariest striker in the welterweight division right now. Like, who is more dangerous on the feet than Carlos Prates? Leon Edwards, him and dangerous don't belong in the same sentence. Morales is dangerous, but he ain't got that touch of death. I do think that Carlos Prates is probably the most dangerous dude we've got a welterweight right now, and for him to go there and slump Geoff Neal in that fashion, I think all of his hype is back. Called out Leon Edwards. I don't mind the fight. If he wants to get that done in Brazil, I think him and Leon could be a massive fight. So, and I think he probably has a good chance of beating Leon too. I think he'd work him on the feet with output. So, I think if Prates can keep this up, he's a future top contender. A lot of people like to say that Prates' biggest flaw is grappling. It's really not. When have we ever seen Carlos Prates struggle with grappling in the UFC? We haven't. The only times we've seen him struggle is the Ian Gary fight where he lost via output, which doesn't seem to be a problem after he just fucking picked apart Geoff Neal for 10 minutes. No, not for 10 minutes, for 4 minutes of the fight. So, great win for Carlos Prates. It's his birthday. He gets 50k. He gets a finish in the first round. He's going to be getting a main event or probably a big fight soon. So, solid win for Prates. Most dangerous dude at 170. Tough for Geoff Neal, but I think that definitely deserved it. One of the best. Probably that could honestly be like a KO of the year contender. Just the spinning back elbow in the cranium knocks out Geoff Neal. Fair play to Carlos Prates, getting one of the few spinning back fists after that. After Lerone Murphy, you've got to stop disrespecting this guy. And again, never bet on fighters coming over to the UFC, as Lerone Murphy gets probably top that KO as he knocks out Aaron Pico with again a spinning back fist KO, knocking out this dangerous prospect, 34-year-old prospect, dangerous guy coming up from PFL and Bellator. Slumps him with the spinning back elbow. Holy shit, it's time to respect Lerone Murphy. Now, don't get me wrong, I've kind of been disrespecting Lerone Murphy a little bit. I've been calling him a decision machine. I've been saying he's boring, he hasn't got this personality. And I feel like a lot of people had that. You know, he had that stinky fight with Josh Emmett and that fight with Danny Egan. A lot of people were disrespecting him. This is a way to buy your hype back, and this is a way to potentially get a title fight next, as he slumps Aaron Pico out cold in, again, one of the best KOs, honestly, this year, with that spinning back elbow. I'm never disrespecting my countrymen again. We could have a new English contender. We could even have a new English champion, because I think Lerone Murphy, I've always said that he is one of the most well-rounded dudes in this division. He can grapple, he can strike, he's durable, he's got a good chin. The only flaw is his output and his kind of risk taking. Well, he took risks in this fight and he looked good doing it as he slumps Aaron Pico out cold. And I'm never, ever betting from a fighter from a different organization. How many times this year, I made a video about this last week as well, how many times this year have we kind of had to hype up these fighters coming over to the UFC from different organizations, these big fighters, these big names, and they've absolutely stunk up the UFC. Aaron Pico looked good for about 2 minutes and then got knocked out cold by Lerone Murphy, who's, you know, quote-unquote a decision machine. Huge win for Lerone Murphy. Definitely the biggest win of his career so far. To be co-main of a pay-per-view, to knock out the hype job in Aaron Pico. I'm not mad at Lerone Murphy getting a title fight next. You know, everywhere I know he's the most deserving contender, but to be fair, he hasn't had any highlights like Lerone Murphy. He pulled out against Aaron Pico. Lerone Murphy stole the opportunity and slept him out cold, so I think he's above Marvels or Evloev. He's obviously got Gene Silva, but he's got to get through Diego Lopez next. I think Lerone Murphy could definitely be a front runner to be fighting Alexander Volkanovski next, and if it's between him and like a Yair Rodriguez, sign me the fuck up for Lerone Murphy instead. So it's got to be a title fight next for Lerone Murphy. You know, he stole the shot. If this would have been another classic 15-minute snooze fest for Lerone Murphy, it would have still been impressive, but he probably wouldn't have got a title fight. But to knock out Aaron Pico in that fashion, slump the KO artist out cold with one of the best KOs this year, you've got to give Lerone Murphy his credit now. You've got to stop disrespecting the guy. And it's got to be a big opportunity next for Lerone Murphy. Massive KO win from the Englishman. I'm never disrespecting my Englishman again. And get rid of those Leon Edwards comparisons as well. I saw so many comparisons between Lerone Murphy and Leon Edwards. Well, I didn't see Leon Edwards slumping people out cold on the run up to his title fight. Last time I remember Leon Edwards before a title fight was him getting nearly knocked out by Nate Diaz. So good win for Lerone Murphy. Slumps Aaron Pico out cold. Bought all his hype back, and he's one of the best contenders at 145. And then the main event, DDP and Chimaev. Nobody's beating Chimaev. No one's beating this dude. He's going to retire undefeated. I don't know how long he's going to stay in the UFC, but I've always said if DDP can't do it, nobody's doing it. And this wasn't just a close fight where DDP just lost a close decision. This was 25 minutes of pure bumming, 25 minutes of pure domination as Khamzat Chimaev absolutely ragdolled DDP. Didn't get the finish, even though he came close with a couple of submissions and those ground and pound strikes as well, where he had him in the certain positions. But man, Chimaev absolutely dominated DDP this entire fight. 25 minutes of pure domination. Absolutely mauled him. And you can't even use the whole stamina debate over Chimaev. Obviously, before when he was fighting the likes of Usman, the biggest debate was stamina. You know, Chimaev doesn't have the stamina. He's going to die when he goes 25 minutes. Well, he just went 25 minutes, one of the best paced, one of the most durable, and one of the best cardio fighters in the UFC right now. And outdid him at his own game with the stamina. Fucking dominated him for 25 minutes. His stamina's tapped in. But yeah, Chimaev just drowned him. Did what he did normally. Shoots the takedown off the bat. Gets him in crucifix. Nearly finishes DDP a couple of times with crucifix. And if he ain't in crucifix, crucifix. He's holding him down, beating him with ground and pound and slamming him, letting him get back up and then pulling him right back down again. There was barely any striking exchanges in this fight. There was a couple of times in the 4th and the 5th round where DDP would kind of land an exchange on Chimaev and maybe wobble in moments, not wobbling, but land on him momentarily. But the whole moral of the story was Chimaev domination. Dominated him from round 1 to minute 1 to minute 25. And like I said, look, DDP is a sick fighter. DDP, I said coming into this fight, if he can beat Chimaev, he's probably going to be on the goats of the middleweight division, one of the greatest of all time. The way that DDP just lapping the division, or at least dominating the division. So for Chimaev to do that to DDP, make it not even relatively close, probably a 50-45, maybe even worse because he got a 10-8 in the first. No one's beating Chimaev. We've got Imavov and Brallo in a couple of weeks. Neither of those guys are beating Chimaev. Chimaev subs them both in the first round. Anthony Hernandez, really good grappler, gets knocked the fuck out by Chimaev. Rainy Derrida, the same fate. You ain't winning against Chimaev by accident. Chimaev's so far ahead of the middleweight division. I genuinely think Chimaev, I know a lot of casuals like to make the comparison, but I can see him being like a better Khabib, more promotable than Khabib, more dangerous than Khabib, more dominant than Khabib, better resume than Khabib. I think if Chimaev really locks in and he wants to get a couple of defenses on his name, he can go far. You know, if he can go out there and beat the winner of Imavov and Barbosa, or maybe beat Hernandez or Rainy already next and beat a couple more guys, Chimaev's got a real case to be one of the most unstoppable middleweights I've ever seen. Who the fuck is beating this guy? And for DDP, it's tough, man. He tried his best to defend the takedown from Chimaev, but Chimaev's a different level. This dude's legit. No one's winning the belt. I predicted him to win the decision as well, and he did. It's tough for DDP as well, because I do think DDP is going to be one of these guys. Kind of like when Adesanya was a champion and Whittaker was the #1 guy. The DDP just stays #1 guy. But again, this wasn't like a close fight relatively. This wasn't like 3 rounds to 2 Chimaev. This wasn't like an Usman Chimaev situation. This was 25 minutes of pure domination. This could have been worse than a 50-45 for DDP. So, dominant win for Chimaev. Nobody's beating this guy in the UFC. I can see him going on this long title run of just pure finishing dudes. And I think it's safe to say that this guy is the best wrestler we've had, or at least one of the best wrestlers and one of the most dominant wrestlers we've had in modern UFC history. Chimaev beats DDP. Nobody's beating Chimaev. But that's my breakdown of UFC 319. I thought it was a pretty good card. The prelims were slow, but I think the main card started to heat up with those KOs in the main event. So let me know your thoughts on UFC 319 and Chimaev getting the job done.